Hello, my name is Erica Smith. Today's date is Friday, March 29th, 2019. I am interviewing Doug Long on the Ball State campus as part of the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project. Thank you, Doug, for agreeing to participate in this effort, which we are conducting during the Honors College's 60th anniversary year. So I would like to begin by gaining a greater understanding of your upbringing. Where and when were you born?
I was born on October 22nd, 1962 in Anderson, Indiana, which is right near Muncie. I've got three brothers. I lived in Indiana my whole life until 1996 when we moved to the Chicago area.
And can you describe your family experience as you were growing up?
Yeah, let's see. Grew up in a typical American neighborhood is how I would describe it. At the time, Anderson was a much more robust city than it is now. We had a grade school almost in our neighborhood, very close. My three brothers and I all went there. In high school, at Highland High School, now the city only has one high school, but they had three then. I was active in theater, journalism, all the honors classes we had. A lot of activities, music.
And would you say that theater played a large role in your life as you were growing up?
It definitely did. And also my love of movies. I studied them from the time I was in grade school. And I did plays, community theater plays, and then in school. And loved it enough to eventually double major in it here.
You mentioned community theater plays as you were growing up. Can you describe those plays to me and when you had first started getting involved in those plays?
Let's see, the first one of those was Mr. Scrooge, a musical version of A Christmas Carol, as you might guess, done at Anderson City Hall by a group called Playmakers. And I got to play Peter Cratchit, the Cratchit boy who does not have a solo like Tiny Tim. So it was a lot of fun. We had a great experience doing that.
You had also mentioned your love of movies. When did that start to pique your interest?
I can't remember when it didn't. I mean, almost as soon as I could read. I think my mom and dad had a few movie books, but my brother Dave and I, my twin brother, we became interested in a level that still exists. We would go to the Anderson Public Library. You could get out 10 books at a time max, so we loaded our arms with movie books until we devoured them and then went back and loaded up 10 more. My dad would sometimes get reels of film, but back then that's how you borrowed films from the library, and borrowed a projector. And we got to watch Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush, a lot of other films on our living room wall. We loved studying them then, and we still do.
You had mentioned that you and your brother were very close as far as movies go.
Yeah.
How did this kind of influence your experience with that? And with your theater and your interest in movies?
Well, it all kind of goes together. You know, what I wanted from a little boy, I just wanted only to be a movie star, of course. What else? But the way locally you could get involved with that was theater. And I soon, even as a kid, realized the differences in live theater, the connection you've got with an audience, and film, where you've got to create the world within a rectangle for the viewer who can see it anywhere. So my dual interests started from the beginning.
That's awesome. You had also mentioned your parents. May I ask their names and what their occupations were?
Yeah, my dad, Fred Earl Long, still alive at 86 and doing well. He was a Korean War veteran, and as soon as he got back from the war in Anderson, he started working at Delco Remy, which was part of General Motors. I mentioned Anderson's depletion. That's mostly because General Motors left. But at the time, when he started, it would have been in the 50s, after the Korean War, through the late 70s, and even into the 80s, General Motors ran, and it fueled Anderson. And he worked for that. He's an expert in cars and also a war buff. So that's kind of his world. My mom, Patricia Sirowick Long, she actually, Ball State has a lot to do with my heritage. Her parents were born in Poland and immigrated to the United States. She grew up in a Polish neighborhood in East Chicago, Indiana. And it was one of her English teachers there suggested that you might make a good teacher, which she had never thought of. Nobody in her family had gone to college, but they told her about Ball State Teachers College. And at the time, you could make enough money during summer, believe it or not, to go to school. And so she worked as a secretary in downtown Chicago and came down to Ball State. There's a photo of her with her parents and the brother that drove them on the steps of the Student Center when they dropped her off. And while she was here is when she met my dad. He went to Purdue, but he had a friend who lived in the house that my mom lived in, and they met here at Ball State on a blind date.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So Ball State has a lot to do with your upbringing and has been a major component in your life. Do you
Yeah.
remember Ball State being mentioned as you were growing up?
I was just before this interview, I did a walk of the quad, and I remembered I think the first time I was here was in 1968, which is when my mom got her master's in education, and I was Dave and I would have been 5, and our brother Bill would have been 0, just an infant. And I remember, I think, only 3 things from that day. One, of course, a bunch of people graduating and my mom being one of those people and seeing her walk in the procession. But the others were actually the building we're in right now. I don't know what departments were here in 1968, but there was a swordfish on a wall that my dad took us to see, and I remembered that, and then a man with no leg. Those are the 3 things I remember from that. But yeah, Ball State, in Anderson, that was the closest state school, so a lot of people we knew went there. And in high school, when I was thinking of where to apply, I think I applied at Northwestern, Purdue, and Ball State, and chose Ball State. It had at the time, it was as a journalism major that I applied. I knew they had a good journalism school, and also it was close. I can't pretend that didn't have a role in it.
And you mentioned how in high school you were looking around at these colleges. When and where did you attend high school?
Highland High School in Anderson, Indiana. Now it's Highland Middle School, but yeah, that's where.
Okay, and what year did you graduate?
1980.
And you came into Ball State as a journalism major.
Yeah.
When did you decide that you were interested in theater and decide to pick that up as your double major?
Well, I knew all along that I was interested in theater. I tried to think of what my parents thought would be, out of the things I was interested in, what would be the most sensible major. And I thought maybe journalism. I loved writing, and I still do. And I worked on the school yearbook and all of that. So that seemed like a good choice. But theater kept creeping at me. In my freshman year here, I decided just to bite the bullet and go in blind to an audition. And it was for an evening of short original plays. And I got the lead in one, which was this crazy comedy, Mascara, Pinstripes, and the Ivory. And I had a blast working on it and loved working with people who loved learning about how, the different elements of we had a great high school teacher, but, obviously studying in college takes you to a next level. And I really loved it. So I made it a minor by my sophomore year, and then by my junior year, I made it a major. And I'd already had most of my journalism classes, so I had to really pack up on theater classes. Meanwhile, though, I love journalism. I have some of my best friends still are from that. I worked at the Daily News the whole time here. It was only a print newspaper then. In fact, I met my wife at the because we were both in the Honors College and we were both journalism majors, and we both worked at the Daily News.
Wow, it seems like you two have a lot in common.
We do.
Good. And how did you see your journalism and your theater major play hand in hand as you were going through college?
Well, it's funny. In college, I didn't see it as much. They were both certainly creative things that required a great deal of discipline. But really, I found them overlapping more as my life went on. When I graduated from Ball State, I didn't. Some people have jobs, but I sure didn't. The one I was able to find was a newspaper job. I moved back home. Where else was I going to go? In Anderson, and I worked part-time first at the Anderson Daily Bulletin as a general news reporter. So whatever they needed me for, I drove out and covered. Then I got a full-time job at the Anderson Herald newspaper as their education editor, or not an editor, reporter. So covered all the school boards and things like that. And I did enjoy it quite a bit. I found myself, as soon as I would get home, which was after midnight, because that's when I got off, reading plays and thinking about it and remembering how my love for directing plays, was launched here at Ball State, really. And I decided I wanted to go to grad school. So I went with some Ball State friends to URTA, University Resident Theater Association, up at Northwestern University in the Chicago area. I think my friends were all going for tech theater MFA to look at programs, because at these conferences, a lot of schools come to meet with prospective students. But I met with the people at Indiana University about a master's degree, just an MA in theater. And I clicked with them right away. And so I ended up going down to Bloomington, to IU. But I did not have an assistantship that year, and I needed, obviously, money to survive. So I got a job at the city newspaper. I applied and got it. I had been the editor of Weekend magazine, as it was called here at Ball State, for a few years. And they were just launching a tabloid newspaper insert for their paper, it was called the Herald Telephone at the time, Neighbors magazine. And because I had all this experience and a lot of clips from my time here, they hired me for that. So the first year I was a copy editor, as well as a full-time theater student, grad student. So that's, right away that happens. And then I got an assistantship the next year in the department, and it was to write the press releases for the shows there. And so my journalism background and theater background were together right away. And that's really happened pretty much throughout my life, which is interesting.
Newspaper seems like it has played a very large role in your life, and you had mentioned Weekend magazine.
Yeah.
What years were you involved with that?
I wrote for it right at the beginning. So from fall 1980, in fact, that's when my wife and I tried to identify where we met. I think it was at the informational meeting that fall. And also, some of our very best friends, including her two bridesmaids, were at that same meeting. And then I worked for it for all my freshman, sophomore, junior years, editing during those last couple. And then my senior year, if you remember, that was my heavy theater here to cram in, a lot of a major then. So I was the editor of the Homecoming edition that year and wrote movie reviews still, but not as involved in journalism that year because of theater.
Okay. And with your Ball State experience, you mentioned that you were an honors student.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start to hear about honors, and when did that start to pique your interest?
Well, we were lucky in high school to have a very good sequence of honors English classes, and they prepared us to write thesis papers, research papers. And as a university professor now, I can tell you some students don't have that privilege. They simply have not had the training, and nothing to do with their talent. So I was very fortunate. And when I look back, I had a lot of good creative writing teachers, but there's a teacher, Mrs. Parker, who I had in an honors 11th grade English, she prepared us in other ways to come here. She's the first one who talked to us about profs. What's that? And here's what your prof will expect. The footnotes for this are not in the right form, and they need to be because that's the expected form. And so she got us thinking about college right away. And then I can't remember how we were contacted, in your senior year when you're being contacted about colleges anyway, about the honors program. But I was a total nerd, and of course I wanted to do that, right away. So I knew about it pretty early.
So with your experience in honors and your experience with creative writing and your high school teachers all preparing you for that collegiate experience, mm-hmm. Do you think that you were more prepared to go into honors college as a result? Oh
yeah, I think so. But I would say the crucial click happened here at Ball State. And I should have asked you before, do students still take something called ID 199 or an equivalent class at the beginning? I don't know. At the time, we were...
We do.
Honors, okay. I had that with Dr. Vanderhill, I think there were 2 sections which had all the honor students in it, in one of the 2 sections. And in that first week, the way he talked to us and the things he said suddenly made me feel not like a kid who just earlier that year was in high school, but I felt like a college scholar. I felt empowered. It's actually one of the important moments in my life. I try to carry that in my own teaching to students, to not let them think of themselves still as a kid or as someone who might get a B in this class, but as really somebody who might be intellectually curious. He really sparked that in all of us. He had kind of a glee about learning and confidence that we could do it. So I took that on.
Not only did you take his ID 199 course, but you were also an assistant to him, correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that experience?
Those were great. They were the discussion leaders. I can't remember, maybe about 10 per class, and the groups of students were fewer than 10, I know. I remember my own experience as a student there. But we pulled out the topics we talked about in class and pulled in our personal stories and compared notes about being students themselves. But he gave us, a lot of heavy topics to talk about. The family. I remember learning about the nuclear family in his class, and we would talk about that and how our own moms, did they work, and culturally, where were we as a country? They were great, and being able to do that, I became a teacher. They gave me probably my earliest experiences working with college students.
Do you think that your experience with Dr. Vanderhill influenced your decision to go into teaching later on?
Definitely. Even though, his was not my major, he is still the kind of teacher I want to be. So no question.
You mentioned that he's the kind of teacher you want to be. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
It's kind of what I was talking about before. This instilling confidence in all the students in the class that they are not. It's not necessarily just a teacher-student, but we are a community of learners. I've come in with more years, perhaps, of background, but you may have an insight that I've never considered, and an expectation that the readings would be done, of course. You can't have an intellectual conversation about a text without everybody knowing the text well. But mostly, I think it's the encouragement and that confidence he had in us.
Okay. I'm interested in the way that your experience with this community of learners and adult scholars played into your collegiate role outside of Honors College. How did you see that mentality shift into your everyday collegiate experience?
In some ways, I was just in fact, walking into this building, my history class, I remember it was 8 in the morning and I was tired and the professor read to us and I'd already done the reading. And I didn't have the wherewithal to think, I should be listening, I should get something more out of this than I am. But in other classes, certainly what he taught me put into practice, and most in terms of my majors especially. In journalism, I started right away. The summer following my freshman year, I was the arts editor for the Daily News. And it's always a scaled back staff, or at least it was back then. And I got, you got used to, read all the AP news, kept an eye on campus and to some degree Muncie arts events and personality profile ideas, and working with reporters and photographers back then is a form of teaching, and how to inspire them without dictating to them what must be done, and then no question that's true in directing in theater. My spark for that especially got a lot. I'll start with a lot of people when they go into theater think of acting. It's the most visible. It's what most people think of. But in study, and I enjoyed my acting classes. But when I got into directing one with Dr. Alan English, suddenly my sparks were sparking in my head, and you get to interpret the whole play and the whole script, and talk with actors about where you want them to be, but what their motivation is as well. And there should be a build here. Let's run that again so we get that build. That's a form of teaching as well, and that also I took from Dr. Vanderhill for sure, even though he didn't teach theater.
He still had a very big impact on your experience.
Yeah, and then my honors thesis was on the first full-length play I ever directed, Suddenly Last Summer by Tennessee Williams. It was now it's called Strother Theater, but it was called just Studio Theater back at the time. Dr. Judy Jordan, also somebody who has had a major impact on my life, was my faculty advisor for that. She also worked with the Honors College quite a bit during her years here. So my thesis was chronicling the process of that, evaluating my process, and growing a lot that's a result.
And how did your experience with your honors thesis and Suddenly Last Summer kind of go on for you during your time?
The discoveries you make every time you work on a play, you prepare as much as you can. I like to be my own dramaturg, which is all the background research, everything you can. You've read the play so many times, you can identify where things are in the play, why things happen. But that's how you go to the first rehearsal. Then, and you plan the rehearsal period, but then things happen in rehearsal. Your designer comes up with an idea that's better and fits right in with your interpretation. Actors, they're live animals. They come up with great things working together. And I discovered some of those things during that play, even right after the play. I don't know if they still do this, but we used to, when a play closed there, we'd all go down to the theater lobby and have, I don't know if we called it a post-mortem, but that's kind of what it was. What did we get out of this? And Kip Schauger, who is a longtime professor there, just recently retired, when the play starts, we had planned on, because there's a lot of jungle imagery in it, even though it takes place in the American South. So we had these brightly colored lights in the ferns and things. And when the play started, I had it all come up. And it was only after the play had closed and we were at this meeting that Kip said, if you're going for that, what if in the darkness just those jungle lights came up and then the main lights come up? I thought, what a great idea. I wish I'd thought of that. And it was a great idea. And that's the kind of thing, and then you take that to the next one. And I think then, I told when I was not doing theater for a while and trying to think of, do I want to go to grad school and what would I focus on? I had such a thirst for that's what took me.
That's awesome. You had mentioned that Judy Jordan was your faculty advisor for your honors thesis for that. How did she influence your project and your directing?
She ran something, she taught the oral interpretation class I took here, and that whole branch is now called performance studies. And in her classes, and I took a lot of them, we would study literature. It could be novels, short stories, poetry, theater, plays, dramas. And she was a very focused, very specific interpreter of those. And she was not an easy teacher. And I worked very hard in her classes, and I loved it. You can analyze a play well enough for an A- or something, and think like a student. But she's another one who, like Dr. Vanderhill, pushed us to, no, really, what is this about? What's going on there? What does this poem mean? Why does it sound the way it does? How do the rhythms of this poem add to what it means? And so that whole idea of analyzing a script, I think that's the director's most important job, is to analyze the script. She gave me such a solid basis for that. And I chose such a complicated play, Suddenly Last Summer. It's got some surrealism in it. but she was with me the whole way. Whenever I needed her for for feedback, she didn't direct it for me, but she gave me great feedback the whole way. I said Violet Venable, the older lady in the play, is trying to remember last summer, and because that's when her son died, and her niece is the other one who tries to remember last summer. And the niece has this big monologue toward the end of the play where it all comes rushing back. And I wondered, should we just film it and show the audience what happened last summer? And she gave me the options. Yes, what you're thinking, sure, they would get to see it, but would they imagine it through Tennessee Williams' language in the same way? And would you be making the choices for them rather than them imagining? So we didn't do that. And what we did is we created our own sound effects. There's a time when on this beach where the son eventually is killed, this band of boys comes marching up, hitting these tin instruments. And we did that. Tim Casto, who is my sound designer, he worked with the microphones, so it sounded like they were coming from far away, then got very near. And so when we put that in the story she's telling, when it gets at the most painful part, that's when those are the loudest. And so we came up with a much more creative way, not only for us, but I think for the audience to picture the demise of Sebastian Venable in that play.
You mentioned that the play was very complex and complicated to orchestrate. Why specifically did you choose Suddenly Last Summer by Tennessee Williams?
Well, that's a good question. But, I wanted something challenging. I'd seen the movie, with Katharine Hepburn and Montgomery Clifton and Elizabeth Taylor. And, I read a lot of plays to narrow down you got to submit a few titles you were interested in. And that was one of 4, I think, I put in. And one, I'm pretty sure I must have put in, I don't know if I did, Barefoot in the Park, a very popular play at the time. It would have been a lot easier, too. It's a very enjoyable play to watch, but it's not as tough nut to crack as this Tennessee Williams play. So that was why I think. I thought it was that I could get to some of it at least, and that it would definitely be a challenge.
A lot of honors college courses inspire complex thought process. Do you think that this influenced the way that you thought about Suddenly Last Summer?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Not to simply think in terms of how can we put it up so the story will make sense to the audience, even though you are always thinking of that, but deeper. And I don't think as someone in my early 20s, I nailed it, but I got to some things, and I understood what I got to at the time. So yeah, I did, and Judy Jordan helped me through that process.
You had also mentioned that Judy Jordan was one of your more challenging professors that pushed you to really get to those boundaries and those limits of your thought process.
Yeah.
Did she do the same thing with this play for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thought up the good questions to ask, I think.
Can you elaborate on that experience a little bit?
It's going back a while, because that would have been 1984, the spring of that I did that. I'm trying to remember some specifics. I do know there was a time I called her from rehearsal with some things to talk about, and she was home for the night. I think now if a student called me at home, how would I feel? But she was great. She came out after rehearsal and talked me through. And I don't know that it was a problem we were having, but an obstacle, and what does this person want? What really happened to Sebastian? Whatever it was, she was willing to knock through those questions with me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You were also involved in many other plays on campus. Can you describe your experience in the theater department with those plays? Yeah, we, and a lot of scenes for classes as well. And as a student, it all adds up. None is most important as far as the others. One play story I can think of has to do with the last of my professors who is retiring this spring. Now she's Beth Turcott. She was Beth May at the time. And she was new to Ball State at the time.
During the summer, we did a musical called Dames at Sea. It was a satire of early Warner Brothers musicals like 42nd Street. Anyway, a lot of very talented musical theater people tried out, and so did I. I've sung during a lot of my life, but I was not a dancer or anything. And this had tap dancing. Of course it did. It was a tap dancing musical. So my learning curve was pretty steep. And she taught us everything. I borrowed my brother Dave's tap shoes, and I got through that. And I don't know why she did this, but I don't know if you remember, if you've ever seen a clip from the movie Gold Diggers of 1933, which was filmed during the Depression. It's called We're in the Money, and they have these gigantic coins. Anyway, Dames at Sea has a parody of that, and we were going to use giant coins. And she pulled me aside and said, "Doug, I want you to choreograph the coin number." I thought to myself, choreograph? You've got to be worried about my dancing. How can you want me to choreograph? But she trusted me, so I did, and came up with how we were going to do waves and whatever we were going to do. And she had me teach it to the other chorus people. I've thought about that a lot since. It's kind of emotional memory that she not only trusted me, but knew that would give me some confidence, and it did. So I learned a lot from that and try to challenge students in the same way when I have the opportunity.
That's awesome. You mentioned that she had taught you to dance for this play Dames at Sea.
Yeah.
Did you go to her and ask for this lesson?
Well, we had to learn. Even the ones who knew how to dance had to learn choreography. So I learned that, and she was the kind of teacher. If somebody needed extra help, she just gave it. And I took a whole series of vocal classes from her too, pop vocal styles. They were great. In the final one, it was a nightclub class. We had a live band and mics and everything. But I also took stage movement, stage dance. I can't remember what the name of it was, and we learned some basic, stage dances, including, in case you're wondering what era this was, flash dance. So, I learned a lot from her from that too.
You mentioned that you have a history of vocals and being involved in singing. Yeah. When did that start?
Church choirs from even grade school on. I was in the junior choir, then the adult choir, and then in junior high and high school, always in those, in our swing choir in high school. And then a big gap, because in grad school, I was very focused on theater. But I've been in musicals, directed a lot of musicals, and last few years have been in church choir. So off and on over the years, but always a part of me.
You mentioned church choir and swing choir. Did you find yourself involved in choir at Ball State as well while you were going through your undergraduate degree?
Only really through Beth's classes. It was such a joy to get to do those, because I think we only sang solos and occasional duets in there. And Beth was the kind of, she wanted us to be technically correct, sure, but for her it was more about bringing out who you were through what you were doing. I remember in two classes with her at the end, we had to do an autobiographical show. I put 3 songs together, whatever. So the first class I took in it, I did the Beatles, because they were and still are my favorite group. And that, brought me kind of in the direction of what she was talking about. But for the last one, I chose songs that connected to important women in my life. And that made it very personal. And that's the kind of thing she still does with her students. Brings yourself to the art.
So you've mentioned Beth Turcotte and Alan English and Dr. Vanderhill. and all of these professors that have influenced your experience. Were there any other honors professors or professors in your department that had influenced your experience during your college years?
Well, you still do honors colloquia, I think. We had a great one in journalism on underground journalism, and the teacher was Fred Blevins, who had been a campus radical here in the 60s. And we learned a lot from that, from the books. Like we read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, and we read all the right books for that, and just from Fred's stories about challenging the administration here, and what that means for a writer, from a journalism point of view. It very, very memorable. From a project in there, I did protest songs of the 60s and analyzed them. I love that the honors program encourages that, very specific topics in small group discussions.
You mentioned that Fred was a radical and taught a lot of radicalistic points of view.
Yeah.
How did this experience evolve you, or what did you think of your experience as you went through this?
It was richer for me because we remember this was the early Reagan era, the preppy era. And so it was not the radical era, and it really widened our view of what a campus newspaper is and means to a campus, what a student's role at a university is, what a journalist's responsibility is. He did a great job of hitting on the big themes, I think.
You were also still involved in the daily newspaper at this time. Did you see any of this play a role in your writing as you were writing for the Daily News or involved with the Daily News?
One of the most memorable days, there was the day President Reagan was shot in 1981. Some days you'd go in there and it seemed like a class project. You saw students, you would see students in other classes, but we really tried to take a professional newspaper attitude. And on that day, I remember going in after class, whatever class I had before that, and it was buzzing. I mean, people were looking, at the time, what's the latest on AP? And our computers were brand new in terms of connecting to what the world later called an internet. To get the very latest on how we're going to break. Okay, what do we have planned on page one? We got to remove that. Here's what's going to go on instead. That's when I realized a newspaper is an exciting place to work on a heavy news day like that. I mean, it's busy, but very exciting. So that I learned. In terms of the responsibility of the press to the public, when I was in Sigma Delta Chi, which was our journalism honors, I was the vice president of that. We actually sued the university because of the open door law. There was a board meeting that they shut our reporter out of, and under Indiana law, you were not allowed to do that. And so that's what we did. We held a fundraiser downtown Muncie for this. We were on the Indianapolis TV news, and it was not out of malice at all. I don't remember anybody that was anything but thinking in terms of what the press's purpose to the public is, which is access to what's going on.
You mentioned Sigma Delta Chi as your honor society that you were involved in. What year did you get involved in that?
It's whatever year they invite you. It must have been sophomore, maybe junior year. And same over at Theater Alpha Psi Omega. We had a chapter there as well.
And you mentioned that you were the vice president of Sigma Delta Chi.
Yeah.
What year would that have been?
I think probably 82 through 84, because it was 2 years that I was vice president for that. And then Alpha Psi Omega, I was the president for the 83-84 year. And that was the first year of, I believe, of the College of Fine Arts. Because I remember they asked for, could we have somebody from art, music, theater as a representative? And so I was the student representative for us.
What was that experience like being a student representative?
It was great, because you know what students need, what their weird hours are, where other students go back to their dorms to work on homework. You go to rehearsal, and you still have to do the homework and figure it all out. So I knew them and was glad to explain what the needs were.
And who appointed you to this position as being that student representative?
Probably our chair at the time, who is Dr. Edward Strother of Strother Theater fame. I would guess. I know he's the one that asked me.
With all of these different organizations that you've been a part of and being in honors college, journalism, and theater, did you see a heavy time commitment on your hands during your time in college?
Yeah, and a lot of that had to do with the majors I chose. Because in journalism, if you work at the Daily News, that's every night till the paper gets out. If it's theater, it's rehearsals and play rehearsals and scene rehearsals. But you become disciplined about it, and I'm usually happiest when I do have a full plate if it's things I really love doing. So I learned a lot here as far as that.
Were you involved in any other organizations while you were on campus?
Oh, I lived in Swinford Hall in the honors dorm, and I was on the dorm council, hall council, I think we called it. But not much else. One of my roommates once was involved in a fraternity, and I just couldn't imagine how anyone would have time, because my evenings were all taken up, for my majors.
What years did you live in the Swinford Halls?
Let's see, I got in spring '81 through spring '83, so about 2 years, I guess.
Okay. And just to backtrack a little bit, can I get clarification on what Alpha Psi Omega is specifically?
That's the theater honorary fraternity.
Okay. Yeah. And then while you were in the Swinford Halls, what was your experience like? I know you said you were on the honors council for that.
Yeah. Well, it was great to have an honors dorm because as crazy, and they were college kids too, but they did study, so at least you were surrounded by people who had books and, would work late on stuff if they needed to. So that kind of helped with the discipline. I learned my first week there that it doesn't quiet down until midnight, so my hopes of sleep before that were going to be tough. But I met a lot of good and inspiring friends there. The guys I roomed with we're still good friends.
You mentioned a lot of people that you had met. Are there any relationships that you still have going on to this day with any of your...
Well, a lot, and a lot more than there would have been if the internet and Facebook hadn't happened, because for people my age, a lot of people from your past kind of sailed away, and it was not a sad thing. You just understood you'll never see them again. And then Facebook came in and boom, suddenly there we all are again. But there are some that have gone through no matter what. Our friend Dawn, who is Kay's best friend back in high school and college, she's still in our lives. She's a genealogist out in Salt Lake City now. Our friend Emily, who's the editor of a publication in Indianapolis. Jeff and Cindy Crosby, they're both from journalism, very close with us. My theater friends, I'm actually, this weekend is a reunion in Muncie, so I'm seeing a lot of them, but we're all on touch online now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Within a lot of departments, there are different groups of friends that form, and with you being involved in 3 different departments, what did that friend social dynamic look like for you?
We had a pretty tight, because my wife was my girlfriend all through Ball State, that kind of, our Daily News friends were always a very tight group. But in theater, when you work on plays, you become very intensely involved for a short period of time. And so I gladly, I hung out with them as well, sometimes out of need. I remember when we were in Judy Jordan's performance of Shakespeare class, we had to have Hamlet read by the next day. And we had play rehearsals, and then I'm sure scene rehearsals. And there used to be, I don't think it's there anymore, a place, I forget which street, called Jerry's, an all-night diner. And we sat at a round table, and they just kept bringing out more pots of coffee. And through the night, we all broke up the play into parts, and we just read Hamlet out loud there. And that's a lot of time with people, and good people.
Do you think having that collaborative experience and having that sense of camaraderie with your different theater major friends influenced your experience at Ball State?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I think of Ball State, I think of all those people. You know, it's great now to walk around these, but the buildings. But when I was just doing the walk around the quad before this, when I went by West Quad, which has not been the journalism building for decades, a pang of, nostalgia went over me, and I thought of, gosh, when I got to be one of the editors and got to be in the editors meeting in that window, and all the experiences Kay and Casey and Dawn and Emily and all our friends had up there. That's what the ghosts that happen when you walk on a campus again. Those people.
You've mentioned your wife a few times and how you met her through the Daily News and how she was also involved in Honors College.
Yeah.
What years, or when specifically, did you meet her?
The first time I saw her was at orientation, the summer of 1980, and they at one point corralled all the journalism majors into one room, and I sat in back, didn't ask anything. She sat in front of and asked a lot of questions, so I noticed her right off the bat. But really it was the fall of 1980. Whoever wants to work at the Daily News, okay, now who wants to work on Weekend Magazine? And once we got off into there, little did we know, we clustered off into a group that included lifelong friends. And so we worked on that. Weekend Magazine came out on every Friday in the Daily News, and so we put it together on Thursday nights. And so that was our big night together to work on the design, paste up, everything for Weekend.
And what's your wife's name and her maiden name?
When she was here, she was Kay Bacon, just like it sounds. And she's from Fort Wayne.
And then, as her being a part of the Honors College as well, did you two work together closely on any of your honors courses?
Really, the only one we had together, I think, was ID 199, but we sat together then. Her friend Dawn and my friend Brian Schock from high school. And we got to know each other there. I remember thinking when I was leaving high school, because especially my theater friends, we were so close, I thought I will never meet people in college that I bond with like this. And then I met Kay and Dawn in this class and also at the newspaper, and I did, and we had a lot of similar interests. So yeah, we worked on journalistic things probably more than honors things after that, but yeah.
You mentioned that Dawn was also involved in the daily newspaper and in Honors College, correct?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Were there any other friends that you had in your friend group that were involved in one of your departments and also in Honors College with you?
Yeah, not too many from theater in my era were, I don't think, in the Honors College, but several in journalism were. Casey Miller, who was my roommate for 3 years. He was the year behind us, but he was the editor of the Daily News after we left. And he was Honors College for sure. Scott Sando, who was theater, a few years ahead of me, but we met in Swinford Hall, and we're still very good friends. He's out in California, and he has worked on films and all sorts of stuff out there. He was in Honors as well. If I thought about it, I'm sure I would come up with a lot more, but I think of them in their areas more than that.
You mentioned that a lot of these groups that you had met, especially in the Daily News, have been lifelong friends. How exactly has your relationship shifted as you've gone through time, and how have you kept that up?
Well, again, thanks a lot to, I hate to keep brand naming, but, Facebook. But we have a Daily News alumni on there. I put together the one on Ball State Theater alumni, which since we've opened up to all Ball State Theater alumni. When I did it, it was just for my friends, but now it's for everybody. So that's one way. In journalism, we've kind of learned to support each other through the evolution of that, because what we learned was print journalism, and in the years since, I don't need to tell you that it's changed quite a bit to largely online journalism. And a lot of people have gone on to use their skills from journalism for other things. I mean, I am correcting writing every day, as a professor, and my love of writing was nurtured here, in journalism. So even though I don't work for a daily newspaper anymore, that's still true for me, and it's true for a lot of them too. Some of them, my wife still works for a newspaper in the Chicago area, but many of them don't, but they are still writing, editing, using those skills somewhere. In theater, it's even more. Whereas in business or medicine, once you start as a doctor or a lawyer, you kind of can be that forever, if you were with a firm or something. In theater, it's not like that. There, for the most part, you're working project to project, and a lot of people stay with it for some time, but often branch out into other areas. And it's okay and totally understandable, but a career, I would put that in quotes, in theater is as much about endurance as anything else, and a decision to, okay, that wonderful project is done now. Do I try for another project? Do I do something else? What are my family responsibilities? Do I need to do something else? So we support each other in all those different ways. So some of them are still going strong, designing, acting, directing. Some work on Broadway, some work in school, universities around the country, on television, whatever. But some don't. And some of those who don't were among the most talented people I knew here. So over as decades go on, you support each other because of the people they are and your common bond.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You mentioned this inner strife and this almost like thought to go on and go into different projects and stray from that path when it comes to theater and acting. What was this experience like for you specifically?
I've gone through many waves of that kind of thing. When I was at IU for 11 years, first getting an MA degree, then and working at the newspaper, and then for 9 years I worked full-time in the theater department there as their director of audience development, and also taught acting and performance studies classes, and toward the end did a whole second degree, an MFA, Master of Fine Arts in directing. And at the end of that, I knew I wanted to go to Chicago to work professionally, to try, And so we moved up there in 1996 on Kay's newspaper job. And I temped for 3 years, and especially during those years, temping is not the most glamorous thing in the world, but you leave a temp job where it is. And I focused really heavily on theater. I was almost never not dually in performance and rehearsing something else, mostly as a director and sometimes as an actor. So it was non-stop, always something up, something rehearsing, and always getting another project going. And it's one way to do it. When I got the teaching job at DePaul in 2000, almost right away I had to start pulling back a little, because now I had, you don't leave your job at work when you are a teacher. I had a lot of grading to do, a lot of planning, working outside with students. I just had to cut way back. I still did theater, but had to cut way back. And I can't speak for all people in theater, but my usual feeling on closing night is, well, that was great, but of course I'll never work again. It's just natural to feel that crazy way. And so I've gone in ebbs and flows over the years, sometimes a lot of it depending on my time, and then sometimes when I have time, there's nothing available. All the directing slots are taken. You either don't get an audition, or you do get an audition as an actor and you don't get it because there are lots of people at the audition. So yeah, it's a weird profession like that. But the people who do it, it's like a religious calling. You feel a calling to it, and you do it.
With theater and acting being a huge time commitment, as you've mentioned, how did that affect your relationship aspect of your life?
My wife was in it because she'd known me since here. She knew what it meant to go into a rehearsal period, and you don't see me very much. The part I might do over a little differently. I mean, I told you the pace I did is with my kids, because when we moved up to the Chicago area, which was my heaviest time in theater, they were very young, and I was not home enough, I don't think, afterwards to work on homework with them. I'd get there, by the evening and, see them before they went to sleep. And I read to them and all that. But I think it's a sacrifice, people in theater. And journalism is like that, too. If you can't leave if the paper's not out, you have to keep there. There are professions. I don't remember anybody talking to us about that kind of thing when we were here, but maybe they did, and it just seemed so far off to a young person that you didn't hear it. And in the long run, my kids are more important to me than these other things. So that's it. It did affect that. Hopefully, we've survived.
You mentioned your kids. May I ask how many kids you have, and can you give me a little bit more details about them?
Yeah, Adam is 29, I think, and Sarah is 26, and they both live in the Chicago area.
And you mentioned initially that you were very, very heavily involved and busy when they were younger, and you didn't feel like you were there very often.
Sometimes, yeah.
How did this dynamic change over time?
Well, once I started teaching, even though that requires a lot of hours, a lot of it can be at home. So then I was able to be part of their regular routines a little more, which I think was a good thing for all of us.
Good. And just to backtrack a little bit, you mentioned church as being a very influential part of your life. Mm-hmm. Were you involved in church while you were in college?
Not really. We had, in high school, I was very active at our church, Trinity Episcopal Church in Anderson, sang in the choir. Here, when I would go home, which wasn't that far to go, I'd go with them to church there, but I didn't really end up going here very much. I don't have a good answer for why. I think I was just so focused on my new role as student that overtook everything, I guess.
Understandable. And you received a master's from Indiana University in 1989.
Yeah.
In directing, and then an MFA in directing in 1995. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about your transition from Ball State honors collegiate life into your experience at Indiana University? Sure.
Yeah. Well, I left here having learned how to be a disciplined student, and that made a big difference. When I started the MA, and at the time I was planning on going on to a PhD. That my acting and directing professors here had PhDs, and so I figured that's what you get if you wanted, and that is what you used to get. But by the 80s, the MFA degree had really taken over. But I decided just to stay where I was for the time, and I finished up my MA because I do love writing and researching, so I was glad to write a thesis. But in terms of what the honors, the program here in Ball State in general, I was able to go there and have to be at work. I told you I worked at the newspaper that year. Be on the copy desk at 6 in the morning, and then when the paper was out, late morning, go over to IU and go to classes all day. If I was working on a play then, play rehearsal, which would go until about 11. And I was almost always in an acting or directing class. Scene work after that, so 11 to midnight or later. And then come home and do homework. And remember, this is after midnight, and I have to be at work at 6. So I didn't sleep a lot then, but I had learned from here how to get it done, and I did. So yeah, I think that did help me.
With this large time commitment in your master's program, how did you see this affect your life all around?
Well, it was before we were married, so I could be 100% selfish. So everyone in my household, just me, worked around my schedule. So that was pretty easy. And then even really when we got married in 1987, so I started working full-time in the theater department that year. Still was working on my MA thesis. and Kay was working at the newspaper. But even with two of it, we had two weird, her with newspaper jobs, she had weird hours too. It was really when we had kids that, you can't leave an infant at home, so we had to figure out how to, make sure somebody was there, or if there was a babysitter or daycare.
And you received both a Master of Arts and a Master of Fine Arts. Can you clarify the difference between the two?
Yeah, and it's kind of academically awkward to get two masters in the same area like that, but it's because with the MA I was planning on going on to a PhD, but that's now largely a research degree. If you are theater history, theater theory, those people still get PhDs. But if you are in acting, directing, designing, those areas get MFAs. So I wanted to get the degree specifically in the area I was interested in, directing. So that's why I got a second master's in theater, as odd as that may seem.
Did you intend to go into directing after your collegiate experience at Indiana University?
Definitely. That's we stayed for 1 year afterwards to focus on this move to Chicago that we had planned. And then we came up here and, we went with our plan, which was to immerse me in it. So, thank heavens I married somebody who bought into that plan. And so she, besides my temp work, she largely supported us that year. And the very first thing I did was assistant directed at Steppenwolf Theater, one of the very big theaters in Chicago, for no money. There's the big secret. You make no money assistant directing at the big theaters. But it was an incredible learning experience to see what outstanding professionals in the field, how everything, and because from the directing side, you get to be in on the meetings with the designers right from the beginning, and then all the rehearsals with the actors. When our play, Slaughterhouse-5, an adaptation, obviously, opened, our director had to fly out to New York where he was going to direct a play on Broadway. And so I got to come in once in a while to give reports on how the show was going, was anything slipping or changing. So that, that, and I worked on a lot of shows and just completely immersed myself. And again, thank heavens Kay was willing to let me do that.
You mentioned Steppenwolf Theater and Slaughterhouse-5 and your experience within the theater department all around. How did this heightened experience within the theater develop your skills?
At Ball State or at IU or?
All around during the time and after.
Well, I think they prepared me well. One of the, when I got to, for my first rehearsal at Steppenwolf, I was wondering, I'll find out how they really work in professional theater. And what I found is they put on a play. It's basically, they've got great resources, but it's really the same thing we did at IU and even at Ball State. The same discipline is required from everybody. And in professional theater, you have a stage manager who makes sure it happens. But they went, at both places I studied, they went for that air, even here, that it's not pop in if you don't have a final the next day. It can't be a casual thing. It's got to be a very solid commitment.
And what year were you involved at this theater?
That one in 1996, when I first got there. But most of my time there has not been in large theaters like that. Most of it has been in what they call storefront theaters. They've converted other things that have been converted into theaters. Chicago is pretty well known for that. So, the actor may be as close as you and I are right now. So you're right up with the action, and I love doing shows like that. The Suddenly last summer here in what is now called Strother Theater, that is the equivalent of a storefront. At IU, we had a theater way up on the top floor called T300 that's also no longer there. That was it was great training for this, where the lighting instruments are really close, so you work differently with that. You usually don't need makeup because you're that close to an audience. That's mostly what I've done.
You mentioned that there were a few theaters that you had experience in at both Ball State and IU that are no longer here. What theaters specifically were those, if there are any others?
Well, it's just at IU that space is gone. They've got a nice new theater center. So they've got a couple equivalents of that give a director a lot of options. You can do it in the round where either the audience is on all the sides, or even sometimes the audience is in the middle and look around, or three quarters where the stage juts out into the audience and they're around it on three sides. So they have that now, and we were able to work that way then. And I know at Ball State they have some different spaces now that they can play with space rather than just a straight proscenium like you're used to at a large theater. In Bloomington, I was involved for 10 years with a group called the Bloomington Playwrights Project, which remarkably is not only still going, but is doing well, very well. But that was a group totally dedicated to the development of new scripts. So you're never, pulling in, they would never do Barefoot in the Park that I mentioned, or Hello, Dolly or something, just because they think a lot of people will know it and will come to it. They're always developing something brand new, which is really exciting for people working on it.
How does your dynamic change within the theater department as a stage space changes?
Well, you're always thinking, as a director, the audience's experience. What do you want them to focus on? So if the stage configuration is different, you just really have to think about where you want them to look. Say you're doing it in the round, or in a square usually, with audiences on four sides. They naturally have, if the general lights were up, you'd look at other audience because you're facing some of them. So you have to use lighting and also the staging, the way you've got the actors configured together to pull your focus right there. Even though there may be somebody standing over here, you've got to figure out, the dialogue will help with it, but the lighting and the staging, how you want us all to look over there. Do I want this to be a moment in an audience's face, or do I want it to be a little further from them? If it's on a larger stage, do I want this to seem like a memory, and therefore do I use a scrim or dry ice or just dimmer lighting? I did a few years ago. I was a company member at a group called Village Players in Oak Park, Illinois, near Chicago, and I directed The Glass Menagerie, a very famous play a lot of people have done. Again, Tennessee Williams, and in it, they remember the father who has left them. In the play, it's a picture on the wall. But I decided to go with a live actor. Most of the play, you see it just as a frame. But when the mother or the daughter remembers the father, we would light him in back. And so he would be there looking right at, the daughter who's remembering him. So, you have you have to control, you have the control over where people focus.
You mentioned a lot of control and professionalism that's really necessary in order to successfully direct a play. When did you gain this experience?
Starting here at Ball State, we in the classes we learned, very specific. What we would usually have choose some pages from a play. I remember the one I remember the best is from Picnic by William Inge, from this page to this page, and so you need these characters. The teacher, Rosemary, it's at a summer fair kind of thing. She gets drunk and stands up on a chair and makes a scene. And some of her students are there, and it's this embarrassing thing. And so I had to figure out, how am I going to build this? I wanted, there was some dance music in it, and I pulled in some Glenn Miller. And at what point in, these are the fun things as a director. At what point in the music do I want Rosemary to be up there making a fool of herself? You have kind of a built-in focus with an actor up on a chair, but how do I want the other people revolving around her? And he really pushed us to focus on that kind of thing, learn some stage pictures, and that we had some exercises that were only stage pictures. And then in grad school, when I studied directing, obviously we had a lot more of that kind of thing.
Overall, how do you think that honors college and your collegiate experience in general has prepared you for your life after college?
Very well. I take it all back to that first week with Dr. Vanderhill. What does it mean to be a lifelong learner? What does it mean to be, intellectually curious? What does it mean to be a scholar? How, and so you put that with your life's work. Am I ever just doing something to pay the bills? Sometimes you do. But what is our purpose here? How can we help people? All those figure into why you choose a career you choose, and how you do, especially how you do the work you do. So I would say a lot of that was fostered here.
And your love for theater has started at a very, very young age, starting with those movie experiences and your experience with your twin brother. How has that love and admiration of theater developed over time?
The fact that I get to keep doing that, and especially with films, considering I didn't ever make that a major or anything, looking back, I wish I could add some years and add a PhD in film studies. That is, if I could go back, the degree I would add on to everything. But my brother Dave and I, we set aside a week every summer to do nothing but watch a barrage of movies from different eras, countries, and read about them. To somebody not interested, this would be the nerdiest, most boring week ever, but to us, it's the most exciting. I also, at DePaul, the program I'm the director of, the first-year program, is that first-year students take certain classes. They're in the fall, they take Chicago quarter. Most universities have some sort of University 101 freshman seminar. Ours is that plus how to use the city as an extended classroom. So we develop our own classes. One of mine is Chicago in film. That's what I'm going to teach again this fall. And so we connect their learning with the world that's represented in film out there, some of the filmmaking out there. I can do whatever writing I choose to do. I've just before I came down to Muncie, edited or sent back some edits on a review for a journal called Film and History, on a book review I did. The first year students also take focal point seminar under our program, and my classes are all film based. I've done the films of Alfred Hitchcock. That's what I'm starting next week again. I'll teach that. Hollywood's Golden Year, 1939, and I just got a new one approved on movie musicals. So I get to make that a part of my life, and I work with students on their topics, which are all topics I love because they're in the world I love. There. And in the Explore Chicago, I get to teach honors students. That's kind of full circle for me. They have an honors program, not an honors college, and those students are required to take honors sections of our Chicago quarter class, and I always get one of those. And it's great to work with them. I mean, it's great to work with the non-honors students too. I don't necessarily find, having taught both, that honors students are more brilliant than the others, but they're there because they want to learn. They'll do the readings because they're interested for the most part, and it's a real joy to get to try to inspire them.
You seem very passionate about your work with your honors students specifically, and as an honors student yourself in previous years, what is it like making that transition from being an honors student to teaching honors students? It's
great. You try to see. I remember my own flame being lit. Here in my honors classes, and there, how can I get them to not only they've chosen this topic to write about. Maybe it's the movie Scarface from 1932 about Al Capone. Unfortunately, a big part of Chicago history. How can I inspire her to make this more than just a film report and something she's really fascinated in, and not an area, and to choose an aspect, a thesis, not that pleases me, but that pleases her. So that's always kind of an exciting goal, is to get them to self-start as far as finding to be really selfish as a scholar in that respect.
You mentioned previously that you had professors that have pushed you and have really shaped your experience as you went through your collegiate years. Mm-hmm. Have you adopted any of these principles or teaching methods that your professors had previously used during your experience?
Some. I think I as a teacher am pretty laid back. I like humor in the class. I like people to know each other's names and speak openly. But I try to have pretty high expectations listed early. I share how many points, if that's what it has to come down to, how many points everything is worth, how many points you missed for missing a class, all of those things. And then if I can set those expectations pretty high, then I try to be a great supporter of them. Somebody that you can call in an emergency, like I would call Judy. Somebody who, I remember in journalism, the class everybody was afraid of was journalism law and with Louis Englehart. I mean, he'd been here since my mom's time, and he was a legend, nationally in journalism. But Kay and I took that one summer, and we worked really hard and got good feedback from him and got A's, which in a class like that was, you worked for it. And we did, and we're glad.
And you initially were very involved in directing and acting. How did you transition into teaching?
Well, I knew I wanted, well, first of all, some people can make a living acting and directing, but I didn't presume that would happen. And because I came to Chicago with the family situation, I couldn't risk if I went by myself, I would have been willing to live in a hovel and, on somebody's couch and done whatever it took to sacrifice. But I can't take those kind of risks when there are children involved. So teaching was something I loved and had been doing. And fortunately at DePaul, they needed somebody to teach almost the same class I had taught at IU, performance of literature, which again, all of that I learned from Judy Jordan here she wrote the book that was most nationally used, Roles in Interpretation. So of course I used her book.
You mentioned that you had some experience teaching at IU. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
That was either acting one or what we called oral interpretation then. So undergraduates who were majoring in theater would take, not only acting one, but 2, 3, 4, and I think there was a 5. But acting one was an open, degree or open class that students from any major could take to fulfill university requirements. And I loved teaching that. It's really amazing they were on a semester. In a semester, what you could accomplish from somebody who was a little afraid to be up in front of people to somebody who really could interact in character with this other student, So I taught that several times there. And then performance of literature, is the way I taught it in the classes, broke down very much the way Judy Jordan taught it here, which was we focused there on prose, poetry, and drama. And again, there, you would be surprised at where the students could go, how they would have never believed they would be able to become this narrator and all the characters in the narrator's stories, with these closed focuses, and have a conversation, with yourself as these different characters. And at the end, I would have them choose, it could be a piece of poetry or a cutting from a story, whatever, that speaks to you deeply. And here I'm kind of pulling from, Beth's. I told you about her music assignments. And there, you'd sometimes, come to tears because they chose such personal stuff. And again, the same student that walked in, kind of hesitant, you want me to, wait, I have to actually perform? It says performance, but I have to, that same student would get to a place where they could confidently share themselves with an audience. And, they may never perform again, but they may speak in front of a meeting or in front of their church or in front of a school group, who knows. And all of this helped them, this work we put into it.
It can be hard to instill that confidence in a student, especially from a teacher's point of view. How did you bring that out of your students, and how did your experience really culminate into that?
That, from my own experience as a student, I knew what worked with me and what didn't. And this went even through college and grad school. The teachers or directors who, kind of had a sink or swim mentality, for anybody with a little bit of self-doubt, that was usually pretty bad. Oh, or sink, maybe I'll sink. And sometimes you do. But if you have somebody, like Beth Turcott, she's probably had thousands of students, and I'm certain she has believed in every one of them, or at least made them believe it, that there was something in them, even though they were, here I am with a microphone, that they could do it, that there was something in them that was worth sharing with us. And my goal is to do that with every actor, student, whoever I'm working with, instill some confidence.
And what years were you teaching at IU?
From 1990 through 1996 at IU, and then at DePaul from 2000 to the present.
Okay.
And actually in between I taught at a couple other places. University of St. Francis, I had directed a couple student productions there, and then they asked me to teach acting. So those were intermittent gigs, I would call them.
How did your teaching experience at IU compare to your teaching experience at DePaul or any of the other colleges that you had taught at?
Pretty similar, really, because really once you're in the classroom, you run the show. I hopefully developed and I hope I'm continuing to develop, as a teacher, but they're very comparable because classrooms, a lot of things go away once you're in there with the students. It's just you and them and their experience.
And how have you inspired other students to follow their dreams and pursue what they're wanting to do within the theater department as your professors have done for you?
Oh boy, that's a good question. The best kind of letters for any teacher to get are from former students who tell you something like that. I've had some, but I feel like I've written more than I've gotten because I've talked to you about some of the most influential, but once in a while, you'll hear from somebody about that class was so great, and if we hadn't done that, I don't know if I would have, and then fill in the blank. And that is incredibly rewarding, End of the quarter, if someone says, thanks for the great class, that's good. No question, that's good. But if you hear it a few years later, it's meaningful.
You mentioned that you had written letters to your professors that had inspired you.
Yeah.
Which professors were those?
As far as the high school, I told you about this teacher, Mrs. Parker, who was not one of the fun teachers by any means, but 25 years after I had her class, I decided to write her a fan letter and told her all she'd taught me. I was so ready for college writing. For when they've retired, I've written for Judy Jordan and Beth, who's retiring this year, and who else? In journalism, some of those people have come up over the year. Sometimes Kay and I have been invited to reunions. Come to Dr. Vanderhill, no question. He knows what he has meant to me. There are a few that really stand out.
It seems like these professors have really inspired you and shaped you. Are you still in contact with them?
Yes, and most of those ones I've mentioned I was, even without the internet. But with the internet, it's really nice to connect with the others as well. I love having lifelong relationships with them because I don't know what I do for them, but they continue to fuel me. So it's great.
It seems like the internet has played a vital role in you staying connected to these people that you have known since you had started your history when you first came to Ball State and then moved on to IU and into teaching. How did you stay connected before that internet source?
Largely letters, and when it comes to girlfriends like my wife Kay, long phone calls. Her first job out of Ball State was at a paper in southern Texas. So I don't know how in the world we have paid for it, but we had a lot of long phone conversations, and we wrote every day, which meant we were not really responding to the last letter. It's much nicer with internet as far as that. With the teachers, though, we'd come back sometimes. I remember I'd try to fit in a play whenever I could. Whenever I knew Judy was one of her specialties was adapting literature for the stage. So I remember we came back for The Great Gatsby, The Scarlet Letter. She did a dark musical called Ghetto. We would come back to see those and go out with her and her mother afterwards and talk about them. And at those, I would see, my other professors here and, get to catch up with them. When our first son was born, after we were up with Kay's family in Fort Wayne, I remember we stopped on campus here before going all the way down to Anderson to introduce our baby to Judy, who had known us as students, and she performed at our wedding. So yeah, this is a place to stop in and check in with people, I guess.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned that your wife, Kay, was down in southern Texas.
Yeah.
Were you still in Indiana at this time?
Yeah, I was. Some of it I was working at the Anderson newspapers, and then she was still there at the beginning of when I went down to IU to start grad school, and I was working at the newspaper there. So yeah, that was a long distance relationship for over a year.
What was that experience like for you?
Very different than it would be now, because now you can Skype and things like that. You can do it right on your phone, and it's there's a kind of immediacy with that we didn't have. But like I said, long letters that that overlapped and therefore didn't really make a lot of sense back and forth, and some long phone calls. And also, I was I told you my schedule, being a grad student when I started, I was so busy. I was totally selfish with my time.
You mentioned that you had a very large time commitment, and with that being such a long distance, how did you stay in a healthy relationship, and how did you keep that dynamic positive?
Well, she helped with that. I remember she got a job at the Kokomo paper during my first year down at Bloomington, and Kokomo is in the middle of the state here, so not near to her family in Fort Wayne, but a lot closer than Texas, nearest to Bloomington where I was. And that was a full-time job. And then at the newspaper where I was working, only part-time because I was a full-time student, I told her there was a part-time opening, and I know you won't be, that you're full-time. But she went for it and got it. So I figured, if she's going to take a part-time job just to be close to me, this is a good sign. So, we've always been in the same place ever since then.
So she took that part-time job. So when specifically did she move back from southern Texas?
Let's see, it would have been probably, she would know for sure, but I think it would have been 1986. And then she lived, I was living with 3 designers, 2 lighting designers and a set designer. And she had her own place in Bloomington, and then in 86, and then in 87, we got married, and I moved in with her.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And do you think that having that distance between you strengthened your relationship once she came back?
Well, it definitely tests a relationship, and yeah, we were glad to be back together for sure.
Were there any struggles that you had to overcome other than just that distance?
Not that I can, not especially. That was a big one, that we weren't physically together,
Understandable.
Yeah.
And then, you are a very accomplished writer and actor and director. Have you received any awards for your work?
Oh, not that many. Let's see. Here I was not. We put together the student awards for the first time my senior year, and I didn't win the director one, but I was nominated. So that that was a pat on the back that I appreciated. Oh, and at the Daily News, we were part of ICPA, Indiana College Press Association, and some of the writing and designing I did for that, including after I had left, an essay I wrote on my grandmother won a first and that's in the state or whatever. So yes, some back then. Since then, I'm not really in the world of awards. Teaching, I got one of the from the honors program at Paul. I was their outstanding professor one year, whatever.
You've received the Outstanding Young Alumni Circle of Achievement Award, which was in 1994. Can you elaborate on what that entailed and why you received that award?
It's a good question because somebody nominated me for it, and now if I knew, I don't remember. I was very honored though to be remembered, but I can't tell you any more than that now.
And then you transitioned from teaching to administration, correct? What brought on this transition?
The job opportunity. Probably very few people go into teaching so they can become an administrator. But I had been, when I was teaching the class they hired me for at DePaul, I taught a whole series of performance. They let me develop that program and teach some of the classes Judy taught here. Chamber theater a couple times, performance of nonfiction, a lot of interesting things, and a lot of public speaking because they needed somebody to teach that. But I was not a tenure track professor. I was hired full-time for 6 years, and at the time at DePaul, that's all you were allowed. So they had to stop using me on a full-time basis. But I'd been teaching these, I told you, Explore Chicago Focal Point Seminar classes, and the assistant director of that became open. So I applied for it, not having even thought of going into that, and got it. And then when that director left 3 years later, they asked me if I would like to step in his chair. It was as easy as that. And I did. It's a great program. I think we're hardly the only university that does this, but helping first-year students have successful first years helps in a lot of ways, not only in terms of making sure they stay in college, which any college cares a lot about, but actually making sure they use the most of it, that they are getting the resources they need. They don't feel like they are all alone. Nobody knows how the troubles I'm having. Maybe I should just float away. I think it's important for all of those things. So I'm glad to do it.
How do you inspire those students that maybe are floating away or aren't getting those experiences to their full extent to pursue those?
That's, luckily within the job I also teach, and that's where I, answer that question from. And you don't always succeed. You meet with them outside of class if you can tell that maybe they are at DePaul we encourage a lot of first generation students, and they may or may not have people in their environment who know what the needs of a college student are. And so I try to talk with them, find out a little bit about them, and if they need writing help, talk about the writing center that all colleges have. Seeing if you want to send a draft to me before you submit it, I'll be glad to look it over and give you feedback. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you feel some failure there. Maybe, could I have made him meet again? Was there another assignment I could have come up with? You never know because each time is a fresh situation. But I think it's our responsibility as university teachers.
And you mentioned failure and kind of sometimes when you think that you maybe could have done something better for a student. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot in acting and directing, there's often a lot of failure and a lot of learning from your mistakes. Mm-hmm. How have you learned to cope with that failure over time and turn it into something positive?
It's hard because, as an actor, as opposed to an instrumentalist, if you're a violinist, your violin is your instrument. If you are an actor, you are your instrument. If they didn't cast you, it's because you were not right. As a director, I know that's for all sorts of reasons. It's because I'm looking for this quality in a person, or simply, I'm looking for somebody short because of this aspect of the script. It talks about, there's so many reasons an actor is or is not cast. But as an actor, how can you not take it personally? That's why some people do get out. Really smart actors, the ones I've known over the decades who stay with it. There's one guy who he works now. He was in my class at my MFA class at IU, but as an actor, he works now all the time at IRT, Indiana Repertory Theater, and he has a really great theory, which is the audition, which is where you usually perform a monologue from something. At that, your job is to invite them to your party. You know what's going on in this scene. They pay attention to you. You're not here to please them. You're here to invite them to your party. So that takes, if you can believe that, that takes away a lot of the nerves because, and self-focus, yeah, I am I am what's going on now. And then the callback, which, not everybody gets called back for roles, but if you are, there your job is to go claim the role. They've already shown some confidence in you and think that you may be able to do it, go get it. Boy, if you can accept those as an actor, you're doing very well. And an actor's job is to audition. If you can get that into your head, you don't do your self-value based on, did I get cast this time or not? Did I do my audition as well as I could? Yes. If that's the answer, good. It's in place for the next one.
You seem like you handle that stress within acting and that failure and casting pretty well as an individual. Was there ever a time when you struggled with this during your collegiate years or any time after?
Well, I think I would never be able to go into just acting. My feelings would be hurt way too much. Good actors can't be that way. But yeah, as a student, yeah, that ebbs and flows, confidence. If you've got a good teacher who can, clearly it's not about who's cast in this play, but who is learning along the way, who's a good helper with the other actors. Who, if you're in an acting scene with them, is he just acting at you or is he really listening to you? Those teachers that can help you learn that will help you.
When did you first notice that you were developing that skill?
Well, I didn't go into acting, even though I act every now and then, and I do enjoy it. Directing is what I mostly love, and that's my experiences here were easily the place where I first picked up that is something I could do, and that maybe I could inspire other people, through that.
How do you work to inspire other people into adopting that skill?
It's depending on what aspect of a show you're talking about. In the production meetings, you've got your stage management crew, all your designers, possibly scene shop foremen, who will know what we can and can't do at this theater, et cetera. And there, you share your notes. Usually I've shared them in writing first, but you share your thoughts about the play that you want them all to contribute to. But then, if you are looking to inspire rather than dictate, hopefully they've come in with some ideas too. And sometimes they mesh with yours and sometimes they really don't. And your job there is, if you're going to be working with this designer the whole time and they came up in with something at the first meeting that is so different than what you see for this, it's about talking with them about how you see where that comes from, but the ways in which it doesn't mesh with my view of this play. And is there anything that you can think of that would, work with this idea? If somebody does come in with it, that's great. I mean, they usually, costume, lighting, scenic designers, they all have a deeper knowledge of art than I do. I mean, I love it, but they usually have a deeper knowledge. And they know where to look for inspiration, and they'll show me paintings, not that we're going to use that painting on the set, but this kind of, the way red is here would work well in this scene in our play for red. And there you're so lucky if you've inspired rather than dictated, because then the play is much richer than if you had just told everybody what you wanted to see. And the same thing really with actors. You talk about what the play means to you, but you try your hardest not to say, do the line this way, hey Shirley, I'm angry about that. First of all, you probably wouldn't do it as well as they would, but also you want them to come up with it. Same with the blocking. If I think it'll be really meaningful if you both are standing in back of your mother in this scene, I've probably got it penciled in on my own script, but usually at the first blocking rehearsals, I'll say just follow where you think seems natural. If they came up with that, great, and it does look good. They'll think they came up with it, and I'll tell them we're going to use it. So that's better to have them do something that has inspired them. Or if they come up with something better, of course I'm going to go with that. They are fellow artists. I'm not just a dictator. If they come up with something that won't work with our lighting, or that you're walking into another acting space there. We can't do that. You know, of course, I'll pull them back. But yeah, you try to get them to do what they do well and make sure it all somehow fits together in this one vision.
That's awesome. And you mentioned that you have this myriad of experience within theater. What specifically do you like doing and teaching at DePaul?
Well, right now at DePaul, I just teach these classes to first-year students. And I know that with the one back in this fall, I just taught, again, the Honors Explore class of Chicago theater. And we went to a lot of different theaters in the town, and it was great seeing their eyes opened, not only to the different kinds of plays and performance, but also we would study the different neighborhoods. How does this neighborhood, Chicago neighborhood, work with this play? Do they seem to mesh, or do they seem very at odds with each other? Our journey there, who did you know, what was the if it was a train or a bus, you know, what was the travel like? Who did you see on traveling with you? Who gets off here? Is it the same people that you see at another stop? It's great to hear the ideas they have about those. In the other class, I love their projects, the research and thesis projects.
And what is it like balancing that administration position with your teaching position?
Well, you know, you always know you're going to take some work home. I try to discipline myself to do some of this classwork at work, since it is part of my job. But, you know, you take some home too. I've done that my whole life.
And has your newspaper and journalism interest been a part of your life since you've started this administration position?
Not as much, but I have written things, and helping students with their writing and clearly saying what they want is a great funnel of this, this training that you've had. But I myself I told you I just wrote an article for a scholarly publication, and over the years I've written when I first got to town, I wrote for Perform Inc., which was a industry newspaper for film and theater and television in Chicago, but I had to give that up time-wise once I started teaching.
And the transition from Muncie to Bloomington is a pretty solid transition, but a transition from this area to Chicago is a very different lifestyle from, the rural area of Muncie to the fast-paced life of being in a city. What was that experience like for you?
For me, because we live in the suburbs, we moved, as I said, we moved on Kay's newspaper job, and we moved to the city where she was working, Lyle, very small suburb. But the commute is something that, a boy from central Indiana never thought he would be doing. It's, no matter what I do, if it's rush hour, whether I take the trains or drive in, it's an hour and a half each way. It would have seemed impossible to me before. So I have to build in, that's a part of any schedule thing I'm doing. If I'm directing a play, I like to drive, because if we're getting out around 11, there are not as many trains that run then. I'd rather just have my car and go home. If I'm doing regular rush hour people work, I take the trains because they have a lot of express trains that get you out there faster.
Okay. And you've mentioned overall that you've enjoyed your time at Ball State, at IU, and just your collegiate experience in general. Was there any time where you had any struggles or negative experiences?
Well, of course. Who doesn't? I can't think of any major crippling events or anything, but, yes, of course. Yes, that's all I could say.
Right. And then as we wrap up our time today, are there any additional stories or is there any additional information that you'd like to share with me about your experience? Or anything we didn't touch on?
I don't think so. We covered a whole lot of my life, and especially about how much Ball State meant to us both. We both like coming back here to things. I'm on the alumni board right now for theater, so I've been back more times than probably most alumni have.
When did you get involved on the alumni board?
Let's see. It just started within the past 10 years. I put together a reunion of people from my era, the early and mid 80s, just because we were all dying to get together. And the Alumni Association helped us do it here. We did it in the Alumni Center. Um, the people we knew, Kip and Karma, Schauger, showed us around. Bill Jenkins, who is the chair now, gave us a tour of the department. And it was just so lovely to see each other after all this time. And then shortly after that, Bill and the people in the theater department put together this alumni, a more formal, alumni group, and eventually they pulled me into it to represent the oldies. And we've put together reunions. We've helped with scholarships. That's a big part of it, the craft scholarships for the current students, because the program has exploded since I was here. And they do, for the graduating senior performers, they go to New York, LA, and Chicago with showcases. And so the alumni in those cities help with those, which is really fun. It gives us a chance to connect with the program and wish good luck to the young versions of us heading out to that. So that's great too.
That's awesome. You mentioned that you've seen that the program has exploded.
Yeah.
And how have you seen that the program has changed as a member of the alumni board in comparison to when you were going through your collegiate experience at Ball State?
Well, at the time I joined in, because if you remember, I didn't make it a major right away in my freshman year. At that point, it was either still a part of the Department of Speech or it had been called Speech and Theater. That happened during my time. My degree is a BS in theater. So maybe by 1984 or whenever I officially said that was my other major, maybe the name had changed by then, but it just goes to show you how recently it had been part of a speech department. They'd been producing plays at least since the 50s. My mom's Orient yearbooks, we saw them in there. But it was still grounding itself as a theater department at that point. Some wildly talented people in there, and I thought we had good training. But it's like an incline, just grown in numbers, if nothing else. Now they get hundreds of people from around the country who audition for these few spaces. And ours was not an audition process to be a major. There were some scholarships you could audition for. So much has grown like that.
Do you think that competitive atmosphere was there as strongly as when you were in college as it is now?
Not being in the department here, I can't say for sure. There certainly was competition, and people who wanted roles, and only one person could get each one, obviously. I don't know if the ratio and there's a much more of a pre-professional sense, I think, in the program now. So perhaps I don't know if it's more, they could answer that better than I could, whether they channel that in a different way. But there was that then. What is there now that I think is really wonderful, that I wish we had, was this focus to theater markets. Those showcases I mentioned, I thought we had great training, but when I graduated in 1984, I wanted to, but I had no idea how to go about Indianapolis, Chicago. I don't even know where to go, really, and my teachers, as good as they were, that's not where they had come from. And now it's so different with all these professional connections. If a student now is coming to Chicago, I'm just on a long list of people that Bill has. Link up with this person, and they do that. And Bill comes up and sees those plays. So I think that's a wonderful thing that's there now.
Do you think those connections are essential to really landing those really prestigious roles as students are transitioning out of college and into that?
I don't think it can promise that, but what it can promise is that you will know the right skills, have the right kind of headshots and resume, the right kind of monologues, know somebody at the theaters who will help you with, here's how to audition at this theater. Here, did you send to this place yet? You need to. That you will have help along the way and some good basic knowledge of how to do it.
And as you're reflecting on your experience during your collegiate years and ongoing, what's one thing that you would like for collegiate students that are listening to you talk today take away from this discussion?
I would say to totally exploit your college years. It's very easy, especially in finals time, to just think, whatever I have to do to get this class passed, I'll do it, and kind of as a victim kind of student. But I think any student, honor students, but any student should exploit it. I don't think of myself as a math person. Why do I even have to take this? When else are you going to get this kind of intense time with that subject that you actually, the truth is, no matter what you go into, you're going to need math. History, I told you I had not a very good history class here. And I look back and think, whose fault is that? I was getting tired in the class, and I could have done a lot more with it, especially in your major classes. You shouldn't want to just pass those. You should want to become everything you can do in that area. Mine them for that. Talk to your instructors, during their office hours. That's what they're there for. Use them.
With that, we will be concluding our interview today. Thank you for taking the time to share your stories with me today for the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project, and it was a great pleasure to talk to you and learn more about your experience.
Thank you.